Welcome to Engage,
where we are inspired by Jesus impacting our city and the world.
Living this way is an art form that is best when practiced together. We do this together by resisting apathy,
Welcoming everyone and making sure no one is left out.
participating in remedying the concerns of those around us and around the world.
Telling our stories, and just by actually being, eating, and doing life together.
We believe that every day is another chance to live by faith
Labor in love.
and endure with hope. Join us, create with us,
as we follow the brushstrokes of the Creator. Welcome to Engage.
It's bandaging the broken, washing filthy feet. Here I am, Lord, send me. If it's loving one another, even when we don't agree. Here I am, Lord, send me. If I'm poor, if I'm wealthy, I'll serve you just the same. Here I am, Lord, send me. On the mountain or the valley, I will choose to praise. Here I am, Lord, send me. If I'm known by how I love, let my life reflect how much
The season of Lent begins February 14th with Ash Wednesday. And during these weeks leading up to Easter, we intentionally consider our human frailty and our need for Jesus. And to help us do that, this year at Engage, we're focusing on the life and the faith of one of Jesus's most famous disciples. In Peter, we see a person who is both steadfast and unsteady, a dear friend and a betrayer, a follower and a wanderer. In Peter, we often see ourselves. And by following Peter's journey, we watch the story of Jesus unfold through the eyes of a very normal human, trying to figure it all out, just like us. But before we go on that journey with Peter, I thought we'd pause and we consider the OG wanderers in the Bible. You know them, you love them, the Israelites. They made a lifetime out of wandering through the desert. They weren't necessarily physically lost, but they were spiritually wandering on more than one occasion. And as a professional at getting lost and sidetracked, even I have to tip my hat at them. Some of you might know I don't always use a GPS. I heard that not using one helps your brain continue to build synapses, and let me tell you, I need all of them that I can get. But the time I got most lost had nothing to do with a desire to not use a GPS. It wasn't even an option. Back when I was working on my MA from Chicago Theological Seminary, a group of us decided to go to Haiti to study the positive and negative impacts of NGOs, non-government organizations, on poverty-stricken areas. And the island doesn't have the infrastructure to process their trash, so a lot of it just ends up thrown in the streets. But the capital city of Port-au-Prince does have what is considered a dump. And we heard that there was a recycling program being run there. They were taking trash and they were turning it into really cool art. And so we leave our hotel, we drive into the dump following this narrow street that cuts through the mountains of trash. And the further in we go, the more narrow the street becomes. Now there are occasional off lanes, and we start to notice that sections of the trash mountains are on fire. So smoke is filling some of the paths. Our phones aren't helpful because there aren't real streets. Now, we're driving through a mountain of trash, and we start to see some shacks that people have assembled. They are living in homes made from trash in the trash dump while it's on fire. Eventually, we pick up some hitchhikers who are riding on the top and the back of our van, and this isn't unusual in Haiti, but when you're driving through narrow, smoke-filled streets, makeshift streets at that, it was a little unsettling. Things were feeling pretty claustrophobic. And finally, someone in our group decided that this outing was just a little more than we bargained for. So we asked our driver, Cherry, to find a way back out. We took a pass on the final destination. And I still wonder what kind of amazing art we might have found at the recycling center. But the risk to us seemed too great in the moment. You know, when the Israelites were traveling after leaving Egypt, they didn't have a GPS either, but they did have God guiding them. Yet they still looked at the final destination, the promised land, and they took a pass. From their perspective, it was too risky. And the reality is that we've all likely looked at a situation in our lives and thought it was too risky, it was too scary, too much to handle. And maybe it was. But I want to take a look at the Israelites' story in brief today to see if we can learn anything from their experience, so that when God calls us with an invitation, the kingdom is yours, the promised land is just ahead, take the next step, then maybe we can be more prone to respond with boldness and to take the next step. Now, if you pick up a novel and read the chapters out of order, most likely you will kind of shriek in shock and confusion. However, that's exactly the way I feel like I was taught the story of the Israelites over the years, kind of scattered like sprinkles on a cake. We go back and forth in the timeline. I heard the stories out of order and over time. So to avoid continuing that pattern, and even though it might seem like a lot to take in at the beginning, I'm going to do a quick synopsis of the Israelites' journey. That way we're all on the same page, so to speak. Now in Exodus 1, the Israelites find themselves enslaved to a cruel leader in the land of Egypt. God raises up someone from their midst, Moses, who is Hebrew by birth but is raised in Pharaoh's family. And he's going to help rescue God's people. Now in Exodus 3, God calls Moses through the burning bush on Mount Horeb, the mountain of God. And in this discussion, God identifies himself as the God of the Israelites' ancestors and as Yahweh, which is the God of covenant relationship. Now, James Cone, who was the pioneer of Black liberation theology, said that Yahweh was Israel's God of justice because that covenant relationship, that commitment to these people, caused him to act on their behalf. Now, fast forward, Exodus 6, in another conversation with Moses, God points out that the ancestors didn't know him as Yahweh yet. Instead, they knew him as El Shaddai or Elohim. That's the all-powerful God of majesty, essentially. Now, pay attention to how this story is developing. The all-powerful God of majesty is now drawing close to be the God of relationship, taking a personal interest in the well-being of these people. He's saying, this is how I want you to know me. You can trust me because I was there for your ancestors, but I'm committing to closely walking with you. Now in Exodus 7 through 12, we find the plagues, which demonstrate how this all-powerful God has authority over his creation. The Passover, and then we also find the departure from Egypt. Exodus 14, they cross the Red Sea, escaping Pharaoh and his army after he has second thoughts. Exodus 16 through 17, God provides food and water miraculously. And then in Exodus 19 through 20, they are 3 months into their journey, and they arrive at Mount Sinai, which is widely considered to be the same as Mount Horeb, where Moses encountered God in the burning bush. God appears and he gives them the 10 Commandments and then reaffirms the covenant relationship with them. The next grouping of chapters kind of outlines the rules and sets up the tabernacle. And we pick up the story of the journey itself to the promised land in full in Numbers 13. They have arrived just outside the promised land, and they appoint spies to go check it out, and they come back with a report. So let's read that report in Numbers 13, and we'll start in verse 27. And it says, "They gave Moses this account. We went into the land to which you sent us, and it does flow with milk and honey. Here is its fruit. But the people who live there are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. We even saw descendants of Anak there." Then Caleb silenced the people before Moses and said, "We should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it." But the men who had gone up with him said, "We can't attack those people. They are stronger than we are." And they spread among the Israelites a bad report about the land that they explored. And they said, "The land we explored devours those living in it. All the people we saw there are of great size." That night, all the members of the community raised their voices and wept aloud. All the Israelites grumbled against Moses and Aaron, and the whole assembly said to them, "If only we had died in Egypt or in this wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us to this land, only to let us fall by the sword? Our wives and children will be taken as plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to go back to Egypt?" And they said to each other, "We should choose a leader and go back to Egypt." Now Moses pleaded with them to not fear and to listen to the voice of the Lord, but they didn't. And the Lord grew very angry. Notice how a piece of what the Israelites told themselves was true. Nigerian novelist Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie shares in her TED Talk about the danger of the single story. And she says this: the single story creates stereotypes. And the problem with stereotypes is not that they are untrue, but that they are incomplete. They make one story the only story. Stories matter. Many stories matter. They particularly matter when we're deciding on next steps. The Israelites held to the story about the people in the promised land being strong, but they forgot about that all-powerful God of majesty who had committed to being in their corner. So what can we learn from this? Well, number one, don't lose sight of the bigger picture. What stories are you holding on to? Are they holding you back? Are they causing you to lose sight of the fact that Yahweh is in covenant relationship with you and has your back? Okay, back to the story. God is upset and decides that because the Israelites haven't trusted God enough to enter the promised land now, even though they saw so many signs and wonders, their generation won't enter the promised land. They will wander the desert for 40 years. The Israelites won't enter the promised land until the leadership of Joshua. God parts another body of water, the Jordan River, and then leads them into the land in Joshua 4. Now, there's something comforting to me about the fact that God is willing to perform big miracles for each generation. And maybe it's because I'm a parent and I'm saying, like, God, what you have done for me, do it for them. So he performs another huge miracle for this generation to see and confirms once again that this is an all-powerful, majestic God of the ancestors, and he will take care of them. And he will you too, by the way. Now, if you're like me, you might be wondering how long it took the Israelites to get to the promised land the first time. Well, we know from Exodus 19 that it took them about 3 months to get to Mount Sinai, also known as Horeb. Deuteronomy 1:2 says, it is 11 days' journey from Horeb by the way of Mount Seir to Kadesh Barnea. So, this verse indicates that under normal circumstance, the journey from Mount Sinai or Horeb to Kadesh Barnea on the border of the promised land would have taken around 11 days. So under God's original timeline, it could have taken them as little as 3 months and 11 days to get to the promised land. But disobedience and a lack of faith turned it into 40 years. Now, the Bible doesn't specifically say how long it took them, so don't bank on those exact numbers, but some rough math says God's original plan was a lot faster. And that's a good reminder. So point number 2, God's timing, even if it pushes us to be brave, is better than our own. And can I just remind you too that God continues to be faithful to his covenant people? Even though the timeline was altered, God still took care of his people in the desert. And eventually his promise was fulfilled. We might mess up sometimes, but even as we try to be faithful to our relationship with God, God continues to be faithful to us. Through the Israelites' story, we are reminded that God loves imperfect people. In fact, time and time again, that's precisely who God claims and calls. Now, lastly, but most importantly, do you know that you are God's covenant people? Just as God renewed the covenant on Mount Sinai, Jesus renewed the covenant through the Passover meal with his disciples. The covenant is not just with the ancestors. Jesus made a new covenant with us. And we remember it each week when we take communion. When Jesus was observing the Passover meal with the disciples, he poured out the cup and he said, "This is a new covenant in my blood. Take and drink. Do so in remembrance of me." And each week when we take communion together, knowingly or unknowingly, we are renewing that covenant. The things we do together in worship, they connect us not just to the God of today, but also to the God of the ancestors. They have ancient connections and implications. Yahweh, the God of covenant relationship, is in your corner. Now we're going to close today in prayer. And I invite you to talk to God about what he might be inviting you into. Consider what the stories are that you've been telling yourself that make next steps seem scary. Remember some times when you doubted that God would come through in a difficult circumstance, and maybe say a few words to God to renew your commitment to a relationship with him. As you do, we're going to share the song, "The Kingdom is Yours." We're going to put the lyrics up on the screen for you to read. It's by Common Hymnal, and it follows a similar pattern as the Beatitudes. It names some of our insecurities and our injuries and our pain. And it reminds us that God is still in our corner. So take now some time for prayer.